two, but who beats out everybody. A bit difficult to see, but on the far right, we have Anne Klein, who created her Mondrian-inspired dress in 1961. So she was actually the first to beat out everybody and to first do her Mondrian-inspired dress. And then we get to the part where you're probably most curious about is, of course, the counterfeit market. So the counterfeit market was something that I thought was quite interesting and really, really intrigued and actually inspired a lot of the exhibition. And for this, I was curious because growing up in California, I was very familiar with going to Santee Alley, which would be the equivalent to Canal Street. And I had often purchased counterfeits, and I said, oh, this is great, I get to be on trend, and I have my little Chanel bag, and it was $10. And I said, there's probably a lot more to this. And when coming to the museum, I started to become more and more intrigued about this idea of the counterfeit market, and I started to hear all these very deep, dark backgrounds behind what's involved in the counterfeit market. So I really wanted to take a little bit of a closer look and actually see, what goes behind all these counterfeits, and we'll get to kind of the juicy details of all of these counterfeits in just a minute. But one of my favorite pieces, this is Dapper Dan, and I don't have a photo of the piece, but we have, it's a bomber jacket that has a shawl collar and it's double-breasted. So what Dapper Dan was doing is that this is way before any of the luxury brands had actually started to put luxury logos on their garments and on things. They were pretty much doing wallets and little small bags, and Dapper Dan had come to the US, and he started doing leather goods, and a lot of the different hip-hop artists, you'll see there's P. Diddy talking and LL Cool J in some of the photos, and they had wanted luxury logos all over. It was their way of saying that they had arrived and that they were making money in the music industry. Well, the luxury companies weren't doing this, and when Dapper Dan had walked into a lot of these places, they said, we don't want to sell to you, and we don't want any of the rappers wearing any of our pieces. And so he said, okay. So he found a way to actually print on leather, and I was talking to him a few weeks ago, and he said the first trial runs of this was quite interesting. He had manufactured it in Japan, and he said the first time that there was a rapper, and he went out, he was in the Bronx, and it started to rain, and the fabric completely bled, and all of the luxury logos were just a big, big mess. And he said finally he figured out how to print on leather and that it was waterproof. So what's interesting is in the end of this, though, what happened is that there was a very famous fight with Mike Tyson. He got in a fight in front of his store, and all of a sudden the press started going to his store. It was at 125th Street. And they started seeing these people walk in, and they had full ensembles like this. And some of the luxury brands said, hey, we didn't create that. And he was in violation of trademark infringement. So he was sued simultaneously by Fendi, MCM, Louis Vuitton, and Gucci, and he pretty much had to close his production then. But he still does do very, very small runs and small collections, and so we're quite fortunate, quite lucky that he's now kind of reviving his legacy, and we have one of the only pieces, I think, in the world of his, because a lot of people, they had simply got rid of them, and since he doesn't produce them like this anymore, we have one of the only remaining pieces. But I'll let you see this video really quick because they do a very nice job of explaining Dapper Dan.
Yo, this is Fat Five Freddy.
You guys
I'm
hear it?
hanging out at Dapper Dan's all-night boutique on 125th Street in Harlem. I got Dapper right here.
One thing that Harlem was known for was having a neighborhood seamstress or tailor that would create their own style and fashions. One of the known designers when I was coming up in the 80s, there was a guy named Dapper Dan.
Fashion in Harlem at the time was determined by the hustlers. Those were the most powerful guys on the corners, the most powerful guys in the community. You had to be like the guys who was getting the most money.
I remember growing up in the 80s, you wasn't nothing unless you had a Dapper Dan suit.
And as a result of that, the rappers started coming on their own. Because the rappers wanted to be like the hustlers.
Dapper Dan put luxury brands on the map. They never knew how powerful their logos were.
We were open 24 hours a day for 8 years, every single day of the year. We never closed. Customers would come in with maybe a Louis Vuitton clutch. So I said, you know what? Let me figure out how to put these logos on leather so that they can have the jackets to match their bags. Because Louis wasn't making jackets yet. So I said, okay. It just took off after that.
He would take aspirational brands
the jacket and the hat, somebody else gonna come and try to outdo them, especially the rappers. The rappers had to have everything from head to toe. I mean, Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Fendi, bulletproof vest, bulletproof coat. They used to come in the store plain and leave like it was luggage.
So you can see why he's one of my favorites in the exhibit. So then just finishing off, before we get into the counterfeits, we have the idea of copyright. So copyright protection for fashion does not exist in the US. There is the highest level of intellectual property protection in France, and there also is copyright protection that exists in the UK, in Italy, and in, well, I already said in London. But there is no copyright protection in the US. There's been close to about, I think, 75 bills that have been proposed to Congress, and all of them have been rejected. So it's quite interesting to see. I don't know if we'll actually reach a point where fashion design is protected. The way that we can protect fashion, though, is through trademarking your label. You can trademark a print, but you cannot, and you can trademark a logo, but you cannot protect the full fashion design. So what you see right here, this is a knockoff that was produced by Zara, and it's a knockoff of a piece that was created by Celine. What I found that was so a little bit alarming and just quite shocking is that Zara had produced this piece. They had pretty much, they had their manufacturers, and they were looking on style.com, and pretty much they had them call right away, and they said, can you please produce look, let's say like 4, 5, 15, and then 45. And they had produced that, and within 2 weeks, it was already on sale in stores. So they had pretty much completely beat out Celine. And there used to be the argument that, well, the Celine customer doesn't shop at H&M or at Zara. Well, most of the people have seen now that that's not true anymore, that very often people will mix a Chanel blazer and they'll mix it with like an H&M skirt or pant. So it kind of kills that argument right there. But that's pretty much because there's no copyright protection in the US that we can have knockoffs like that, and why Zara is such a big market in H&M and especially Forever 21. And then finishing off, we have our different parodies. So the Homies, if you're familiar with it, the Homies collection is a riff off of the Hermes logo. So they have replaced the carriage and the horse with a lowered truck from South Central in LA. And they had even, if you look at the logo originally, you might think that it looks like Hermes, but then you realize it says Homies. So with this, when you look at it, oftentimes people will look at it, they'll laugh, it's a funny joke, and so it is considered a parody under US law. Where it doesn't, though, is if it causes some confusion. If you look at it and you say, I don't quite know what that is, it kind of looks like it might be Chanel, it might be Hermes, but I'm not sure. And so in that case, if maybe Hermes or Chanel wanted to start a lawsuit, that they would probably win if it does confuse the consumer. So then on the far right, we have the Moschino McDonald's collection by Jeremy Scott. And this is a very interesting collection because it was released and it had received more press than I had seen than any other fashion collection in the past few years. And I said, well, it's kind of an interesting collection. He used the McDonald's logo, but what is all this hype about? And what the hype was all about is that a lot of the fashion lawyers and a lot of the press and fashion historians and just general public said, when is the lawsuit going to happen? Everybody thought that McDonald's, because they protect their trademarks so carefully, that they were waiting for this huge lawsuit for McDonald's and Moschino, and pretty much there was never actually going to be a lawsuit because Jeremy Scott had previously asked McDonald's, can I please use your trademark, your golden arches? And they said, well, sure. You could just make a nice donation to the Ronald McDonald House. So they did, and they were able to use it. But what's interesting about this piece, it's a little bit more complex than that. I had worked with, we'll see later on, an interview with Susan Scafidi from the Fashion Law Institute, and in her fashion law courses, she actually has one of the bags from this collection, and she proposes it to the students, and she said, if you're in a court case and we have McDonald's on this side and we have Moschino on this side, would it actually be trademark violation if he didn't ask for the right to copy it or to use the trademark? And some of them argue actually that since he has curved the arches in, it kind of looks like the Moschino M, or it looks like the Moschino heart. So it's kind of interesting to see that would it be a trademark violation or would it not? But that's one of those gray areas in fashion law. So now as we get into the counterfeiting of designer labels, you probably didn't think I was going to be talking about that, but I'll touch on that before we get into the bags and the different things that you're expecting. I started off the exhibition with Charles Frederick Ward because to me that's really where the story begins. Of course we have counterfeits that had occurred before and copies that had occurred before, but the business of it was interesting that it was set up simultaneously with the start of haute couture. So there's a quote from Alexander Palmer, and she said, "The problem of exclusivity began as soon as specific names became associated with couture designs." So as soon as Worth started signing his label, it started to be counterfeited because people realized if they put a Worth label in a garment, they could probably sell it for a lot more. So you can see on top is a authentic Worth label, and it has gold on white. And then if you look down below, you could see a fake Worth label where it's stamped still with gold and white, but the gold has completely rubbed off. So it's probably not an original or an authentic gold, but it's probably something where maybe it's just a gold color ink. We then get to 1914, and in 1914 there was this wonderful article in the Ladies' Home Journal, and it had said by 1914 in the United States there was over 2 million counterfeit couture labels that were stitched into garments. So if you can imagine, that's a lot of fake labels that are in garments, and at this point the Americans were so, if you want to call it, say, desperate or so eager to have a piece of French couture that they weren't necessarily investigating or looking at the pieces. They said, great, it has a couture label, I'll take it. So with this, Paul Poiret was extremely aware of this, especially because he had come to the United States in 1913, and he had seen a lot of his garments that were being copied, that were being knocked off, and some of them were being sold for as little in 1913 as $13. And he said, $13 for my piece? And so he actually tried to start a lawsuit to sue one of these people, and he was unsuccessful because there was no copyright protection in the US as there was in Paris. So what they said, well, you can go register your label in Washington, D.C. So he did put this article in Women's Wear Daily, and it says, "Warning against fake labels." And if you read it, you can see he says, "I will prosecute to the fullest extent of the law anyone that places a false label in a garment." And he said that his label is trademarked in Washington, D.C., and he even has a photo of it. So here's the label I was talking about earlier, and it was interesting because when we had purchased this piece, my conservator came into me one morning and she said, there's a little bit of a problem, I think, and this was before we had got that Poiret catalog. She said, "I think we bought a fake." And I said, "Really?" I said, "That's kind of a problem because we spent, a lot of money on this piece." And she said, "I've never seen a Poiret label like that, and it doesn't look like this one in his couture." Well, luckily enough, we had looked and searched high and low. We finally found that catalog, and in this, you'll see on the bottom it says, "Every genuine reproduction must have one of these labels." And we're able to match up this label with the catalog, and we knew, okay, it was actually an authentic piece. And when we went to the Museum of the City of New York, this actually authenticated their piece, because the conservator there, or the curator there, she had said, "I don't think we have an authentic piece either. It's not to the quality that Poiret would have stitched a couture garment." And we said, "It's not couture." We said, he calls it a reproduction authorisé. It's pretty much his ready-to-wear collection, so it's not, and it's a sample, so it's not that very, very fine couture stitching. We then come to Madeleine Vionnet, where I said she really had a huge leg up and was worlds ahead of Apple with using her thumbprint to actually authenticate something, such as your iPhone. She used it to authenticate her label. So here you can see her signature, and then she also has her thumbprint to authenticate it. So this is a very special video I had found where it shows Madeleine Vionnet actually placing her thumbprint on her label. Voila, you have it. So we then continue on after with Christian Dior, and with his label, he didn't want anything left to chance. He really wanted to make sure that people knew that his label was trademarked, and he even wrote it on the lower right-hand corner that it's trademarked. So if somebody were to, and oftentimes this happened, they'd go to court and they said, "We had no clue, we didn't know it was trademarked." There was no arguing here that you saw it on the label and you saw it was written trademark. So now we get into